Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just want to do a lesson. It's a very kind of outside the box, so this is not really for um, definitely not mainstream Christians. My whole channel, it's not for people who are um, just tied to a certain ideology, and this is more for, I would say, people like myself who are religious, and are drawn to the Bible, but also bring to it sort of a scientific mindset and causality, most importantly. And causality is something that we as flat earthers get on the ball earthers quite a bit. Establishing cause and effect is very, very important and fundamental to the field of science, and to me is the most important contributions in science, because then once cause and effect is established, other people don't have to revisit it, and then they can go and use that established relationship and then build on it and all that kind of stuff. And then, technology can be developed and so on and used reliably. So cause and effect is very important in our natural world, and then also in the spirit world. And so this is just, it's not for even people like the Hebrews who just want to blame other people and just simply sort of, in my opinion, gossip all day. There's some extent we have to do that, call out people based on their actions and stuff. But this is more just for people, again, who are thinking, I would say, outside the box, outside of even the Bible to some extent, but I'm going to link it to the Bible and just maybe have a new thought for somebody, and kind of get an understanding of what's going on at the highest level, literally at the most highest level. And that's the vantage point that I find the most interesting, and that's where my mind stays most of the time when I'm thinking the most clear, about the Bible and why we're here and all that kind of stuff. So I want to start it off first with John chapter 19, verse 7. It reads, "The Jews answered him, 'We have a law.'" This is like all the rumbling that's leading up to Jesus being crucified. His own people are putting him up to be crucified in front of Pilate. Verse 7, "The Jews answered him, 'We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself Son of God.'" So we can even see there's a form of jealousy really at the root of this. These religious leaders are being usurped, by Jesus and his message and his power and all that, and his influence and all that. And he's irritating, in the very least, the structures that have been set up, that they've, quote, worked so hard to set up, the religious leaders. Verse 8 reads, "When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the judgment hall, and saith unto Jesus, Whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou unto me? Knowest thou not that I have the power to crucify thee, and have power to release thee? Jesus answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin." So there are levels to sin. It's not taught in Christianity, mainstream Christianity, which, if you know anything about my channel, is a complete joke. But there are different levels of sin. Thinking about a sin is one thing, and then acting on it is worse. And so both are not good, but there are some sins that are worse than others. It's just a fact. And maybe we avoid all of them, but that's an important thing that Jesus said here in his statement. "Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin." So Pilate is doing what Jesus says, what he's being told to do, being programmed to do, and being authorized to do by the Heavenly Father. And so he is, in my opinion, somebody like this is just flesh and bone. They're just human, and they're going to then pander and cater to the human influences around them, and not seek God's, like the Most High's guidance on this, because obviously he has God right in front of him, in human form. So he would just have to ask Jesus, what he's supposed to do. And so he's not spiritual, is what I'm trying to say. He's just seeing all these religious leaders whine and complain, you know, and they just kind of like, man, there's a lot of people and they have a lot of influence. And then there's this one individual here. What am I supposed to do? And so he's just consulting man. And so that to me is why in our time, the mark of the beast is a number of a man. It's a number 666. It lacks spirit. It's all the people out there that just do what everybody else around them are doing. Everybody can function as a pilot in our day now, you know, and just do whatever everybody else says. They're pressuring me to do this. They want me to put a microchip in my body, yada, yada, yada. It's the same kind of thing. And then all those people, in my opinion, God is tagging them and letting us know, the people who would not take that under any circumstances, and be like, those people are just robots. You know, they're just going to do what I've programmed them to do, and they're just going to talk amongst themselves and do what man wants. You know, again, it's the number of a man, it's the number of a beast, it's the number 666. So it's the same thing that's been happening, you know, throughout human history. And Pilate is just one example. You know, if all the power structures around him would say, you know, we're going to put an electronic device in your body, he would do it, you know. And here he commits, you know, was a part of one of the most brutal evils in every dimension. And so he's just doing what the crowd tells him to do. And so this to me is very, very important. I want to just kind of take a step back for those who are interested in this kind of a thought experiment. Is if we have the Most High and energy, and then we also invoke, you know, things of science and causality, he is then able to create. He would have to be, by definition, because none of this was created on its own. And so he then will infuse his energy into is able to infuse his energy into humans, and Jesus is one example where we know that that's the case. And he is able to do that, you know, amongst whoever he wants. And so there will also be another group who do not have this spirit, in my opinion, denoted by the number 6, the number of a man, just flesh and bones. And that's what we have on earth, you know. And to me, the recombining that's happening in these days, and the delineations, the divisions that are being made, are one group that are spiritual, and that's going to be known by those that refuse the mark of the beast, because they are not catering to man, they're catering to God and his desires and his direction, you know, and his approval, really. And then we have another group that are programmed to not care. And but God is going to then tag them, so we know that they're just robots. You know, they're just only going to do what everybody else says, and then they're ultimately not consulting God for anything. And so God's going to put an electronic device in their body, and then it's just visibly obvious that they're just actors, you know, and just robots, literally, in that case. And so now we have the question, with that as our sort of playing field and setup, which for me personally is becoming very, very obvious in these days that is the case. I mean, you could talk to people, even religious people, about certain things, like talking to a wall. And so those are people, in my opinion, that are just being groomed and conditioned for the mark of the beast. But there's other groups of people, and I think it's going to become harder to have a person's foot in both camps, you know, going forward, just with how things are intensifying worldwide on all levels. And those are the people, in my opinion, that are being recombined, you know, into a spiritual family, and they have something inside of them that will carry on, you know. And then ultimately, that, whatever that is, however somebody describes that, a soul, a vibration, and energy, is comes from God. And so obviously what the Most High is as a substance, no one knows and can describe in any way. But whatever is in that people, and hopefully us, is from God, you know, the soul, the spirit. And so if our body stops functioning and then that thing is released, then that is in the spirit world, and then now in the presence of God, and would have to be some derivative of God, because God made that, you know. It's not us. Like, we did not make it, you know. Our parents didn't provide, you know, that, or anything like that. It's purely a God-made substance, whatever it is. And so it's man plus something else. And so whatever that thing is from God. The body is also made by God, by like our elements and all that. But this spirit, this soul is from God and then returns back to God. And so I think for those that can understand that and know that that has to be true from a logical perspective, the question now should be, first, why? In general, why would God do all this, and orchestrate this, put his son on the cross? Because like Jesus even says here, he is being crucified by the power that is being provided by God. So God is fueling this, in this case through man, through these upset Jews and through Pilate. And he says in verse 11, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above." So Jesus is acknowledging that he knows that this is from the Heavenly Father. These are just characters and actors in front of him that are doing this act against him that the Heavenly Father wants. And so now, to me, the obvious questions for people who can understand this based on these verses and just common sense, based on causality, what is the purpose for this? Like, what happens to that spirit that is in Jesus and then hopefully in us when it's released? What happened when it first entered our body, let's say at a younger age? Even when it happens, no one knows how God stitches a spirit into a human. But let's say that it happens at an earlier age. And I have a feeling that's true for many of us, because we don't even know why we're drawn to spiritual things. Even if we're doing evil acts or sinning, there's just something in us that is constantly at war, and Paul says this in his writings. There's like almost an internal war happening of a spirit that is trying to get back to God, but then being sequestered and forced in many ways to cater, in some cases, to our flesh, in our body. And so there's always this tension, and for me personally, and I have a feeling it's the case for lots of people, it's been like that our whole life. And so the question now is, when that spirit enters our body, whenever it did, when we were young, possibly in the womb, and we have a case like that with Jesus and John the Baptist, so we know that that's definitely possible, that it starts at that time, then how is it changed in any sort of, however that works in the spirit world? How is it altered from when it first enters the body and then when it's released, when we die, when our body stops functioning? What is the delta? What is the chemical composition? How is it impacted by its presence being sequestered in our human body? I think that's a natural question that a person would ask. And what purpose was that for? And so I think the first answer will probably answer the second one. How is it altered? If it's just from an electrical engineering perspective, I'm sure that this is not actually what's happening, or it's likely not happening. But let's say God infuses a spirit, and for people out there who are into engineering or understand filters, it's like if God infuses, let's say, like a broadband signal, and it has, let's say, the frequencies 10, 15, and 20 megahertz, but God doesn't like the 20 megahertz one, so he puts that those three frequencies in a body, and then throughout our life experience it filters out one or more, or however the ones that God doesn't like. He uses our experience here to remove that one, so that the vibration, literally in this case the vibration, would be tuned to be more precisely in line with what God likes. And so there is, like, in that case, it's a sort of a signal representation of the soul in terms of frequencies. There may be that as a component, but to me it would be something along those lines, where something is being entered into our body, and then there's a conditioning happening, and then it's returned back to God in a way, or in a vibration, however you think about it, that is more pleasing to God. And that just brings him pleasure, that he will infuse energy out there that is maybe has the full spectrum, let's say, of good and evil, and then it returns back to him with less or none of the evil in it. And so it's just a process that he likes. And if you read Revelation 18, in Revelation where it reads, I'll get the exact verse just because I think it's relevant to this. Yeah, Revelation. This is a good one. I was just reading this earlier, actually. So, Revelation 4:11, thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. So he's actually receiving power, and so he's described as the most high power. And so I use this for those like electrical engineering types, that this makes sense. There's some kind of electricity, there's a soul, there's something in us that fuels everything, and then once it is released, the body cannot function, and that's death, when that is released and not there. And so in Revelation 4:11, thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. So he enjoys this process. And so to me, this is an incredible thing. There's obviously a lot of questions. I'm certainly not bringing any kind of answers or anything like that. But I think for us now, it's becoming very, very clear that we're living in some kind of movie, some kind of simulation, some kind of conditioning. And it's easy for us to understand how a body is conditioned. Like if we go to the gym and we work out and get more healthy, what happens to our physical body when we expend effort to try and improve it. But how God conditions this soul, this spirit, this energy, this electricity, this power, whatever you call it, how that works is impossible for us to know. But it looks like there's something like that happening. It's kind of my point of this long-winded sort of lesson, I guess, is that's happening. And in my opinion, we have to have faith that that is the case. And then whatever happens to that energy, that soul, once it's released from our body, we don't know, and I think that's why understanding the goings on of the spirit world and the kingdom of heaven and all that kind of stuff is very, very difficult, because we would have to know how that soul is what the person who made that soul, what they value, and what that pruning, why that pruning was needed, through time here on earth. And so it doesn't really get us to any other answers, but I think we can sort of piece together this just from using science and using the scriptures and just using what's going on around us with a lot of people who are just actors and very, very clearly not spiritual. And so it doesn't guarantee that we're spiritual, but there's definitely, to me, it's becoming very, very obvious just within the first few minutes of talking to somebody, people who are just marching towards the mark of the beast, and being tagged like a dog, like an actor, like a robot, whatever you call it, like Pilate, in this thing, just catering to other humans' opinions and just kind of going with the flow, going to destruction, in my opinion. And so to me, these are kind of interesting things to think about, because it's becoming more and more, for me personally, like closer to this point where a division between body and soul, and whatever that soul is. And it's very, very interesting for me to kind of think about, why we're here, and so this to me can only be answered if there is an intelligent agent, a spirit that's outside of us. And again, Flat Earth proves that rigorously, that there is one, and then also that the God of the Bible is likely the one that's behind all this. And then so to me, it's interesting to start wondering why. Why would God take a piece of his own energy, infuse it into bodies? Some of that energy is more perfectly representative of him than others, like Jesus Christ is a more complete. The way I think about it is like Jesus would be a perfect cross section. Let's say if God was like a cylinder, Jesus would be a perfect slice, for those math people, of the Most High. There would not be anything lacking. He would have the sort of full spectrum, and then of the Most High that he likes, and then infused into a body. And then we presumably would have some non-perfect slice, you know, or incomplete slice. And that's just the way it is. Jesus's vibration is perfect. You know, he just didn't get flustered when he wasn't supposed to. He didn't overreact, underreact. He didn't lose his cool. He's right here in this John 19, about to be crucified, and he's just he's calm, you know, and collected. If anything anywhere near this happened to any of us, we would be losing our mind, and we wouldn't even make it here. Because if I had this many people hate me, I mean, I don't even know how I would function in society. So he was obviously has a very, very different vibration, and he was very, very aware of what was happening, you know, because he knew that this was happening because the Most High is orchestrating this. And so his vibration, his spirit, his soul, however you describe it, is complete. And so, you know, to me, I think that it's interesting to kind of think of it that way, you know, and that's kind of my mindset when I'm, you know, an electrical engineer, thinking of this from a causality, cause and effect, and from a substance, a material perspective. Like, we know flesh and bone, like I said, but then there's also, for those who are spiritual, there is something that is, quote, non-physical, that would live in certain people's bodies throughout human history, that would get all of us who have that, hopefully us, to cry out to God and want to return that back to God, you know. And I think, to me, that's why it's becoming also obvious that certain people, even religious people, don't want God here. You know, they just don't want a second coming. They don't want God to be close by. They just would rather things carry on, you know, just flat earth debate day after day, enslavement, financial enslavement, evil, just more and more of it. It's totally fine. Whereas I think there's another group of us that are just like, even if things were okay, like, why not have God here, much less now when it's completely evil and completely stupid and completely boring. It's very, very obvious. And so, and very, very enthusiastic, you know, that we cry out to God and want those spirits to be recombined, reconnected, and, you know, in the same location, you know. And so I think that the tangibility of the soul, the energy, the spirit inside of us, to me is something very, very good to think about in the times that we live in, because it appears to me that God is close by. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye.